You're sitting there, watching the news, trying to make sense of the world, and you feel lost. One expert says inflation is because of corporate greed. Another says it's supply chains. A third blames government spending. One politician promises to fix everything with tax cuts. Another swears the solution is more regulation. Your social media feed shows you conflicting studies, contradictory statistics, opposing explanations for the same events. And somewhere deep in your gut, you have this creeping suspicion. Nobody actually knows what's going on. Or worse, maybe they do know, but they're deliberately keeping you in the dark. Stop. Take a breath. You're not going crazy. That feeling of confusion, that sense that you're being fed contradictory information from all sides, that exhausting mental state where you can't tell truth from lies anymore, that's not accidental. That's not the unfortunate byproduct of a complex world. That's the point. Slavoj Žižek, the wild-haired Slovenian philosopher who pulls at his shirt while detonating intellectual bombs, has identified something crucial about how power operates today. The system doesn't want you to understand it. The system doesn't want you to think clearly. The system needs you confused, overwhelmed, intellectually paralyzed. Because confused people don't organize. Overwhelmed people don't resist. Intellectually paralyzed people accept whatever they're told, not because they believe it, but because they're too exhausted to figure out what else to believe. Žižek calls this ideological confusion, the deliberate production of cognitive chaos that makes critical thinking impossible. And once you see how this works, once you understand the mechanics of manufactured confusion, you'll never look at information the same way again. But here's the beautiful irony. The moment you recognize you're being confused is the moment you start thinking clearly. The system's greatest weapon becomes its greatest weakness when you understand how the weapon works. Žižek reveals something counterintuitive. We live in an age of unprecedented access to information, yet people are more confused than ever before. This isn't despite the information abundance, it's because of it. The system has learned that the best way to hide truth isn't to suppress information, but to flood people with so much contradictory information that they can't process any of it effectively. Think about how you consume news today. You wake up to push notifications on your phone. You scroll through social media feeds curated by algorithms you don't understand. You encounter headlines designed to grab attention rather than convey truth. You see statistics presented without context, quotes taken out of context, images that may or may not be related to the stories they accompany. By the time you've finished your morning coffee, you've been exposed to hundreds of pieces of information, most of which contradict each other, none of which you've had time to properly evaluate. You feel informed, but you're actually more confused than when you started. Žižek identifies this as pseudo-activity, the illusion of engagement that actually prevents real understanding. You're constantly consuming information, but you're not gaining knowledge. You're perpetually stimulated, but you're not thinking. You're overwhelmed with data, but you're starved of wisdom. This information overload serves a crucial ideological function. It makes you dependent on experts, authorities, and institutions to tell you what to think. When you can't process the avalanche of contradictory information yourself, you outsource your thinking to people who claim to understand it for you. But here's the catch. Those same authorities are often the ones producing the contradictory information in the first place. The confusion isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature designed to make you seek out the very authorities who benefit from your confusion. Žižek exposes one of the most insidious aspects of contemporary ideology: the artificial creation of both sides to every issue, even when one side is clearly more factual, ethical, or logical than the other. This isn't natural debate. It's manufactured confusion designed to paralyze critical thinking. Consider climate change. The scientific consensus is overwhelming. Human activity is warming the planet in ways that threaten civilization. But you're presented with both sides, climate scientists versus climate deniers, as if these are equivalent perspectives deserving equal consideration. The debate isn't about evidence. It's about creating the impression that the issue is too complex for ordinary people to understand. The same pattern appears everywhere. Public health experts explain the benefits of vaccines. Anti-vaccine activists claim vaccines are dangerous. Both sides are presented as equally valid, even though one is backed by decades of scientific research and the other by conspiracy theories and debunked studies. Žižek calls this false equivalence, the ideological operation that treats fundamentally unequal things as equally valid. It's not about finding truth. It's about preventing you from recognizing truth when you see it. This false equivalence serves power by making decisive action impossible. If every issue has two sides, then every position becomes relative, every claim becomes questionable, every truth becomes debatable. You end up paralyzed by artificial uncertainty about things that should be clear. The genius of this system is that it makes you feel sophisticated and open-minded while actually making you intellectually helpless. You think you're being balanced by considering both sides, but you're actually being manipulated into inaction by artificial confusion. But Žižek identifies something even more disturbing than manufactured confusion: the way people maintain what he calls cynical distance from the very system they participate in. You know you're being manipulated. You know the information is contradictory and unreliable. You know the authorities are serving their own interests. And yet you continue to participate as if you don't know these things. This isn't stupidity or ignorance. It's a sophisticated form of ideological compliance that operates through acknowledged disbelief. You don't believe the news, but you still watch it. You don't trust politicians, but you still vote for them. You know advertising manipulates you, but you still buy the products. You recognize that social media is designed to addict you, but you still scroll for hours. Žižek calls this fetishistic disavowal, the psychological mechanism by which you can simultaneously know and not know something. The formula isn't "I believe," but "I know very well, but nevertheless." You know very well that the system is corrupt, but nevertheless you participate in it as if it weren't. This cynical distance serves the system perfectly because it neutralizes resistance without requiring belief. The system doesn't need you to believe in it. It just needs you to act as if you believe in it. Your cynicism becomes a form of compliance. Your skepticism becomes a form of participation. The result is what Žižek calls ideology without illusion, a system that maintains itself not through convincing people of its truth, but through convincing people that alternatives are impossible or dangerous. You don't have to believe capitalism is good. You just have to believe that anything else would be worse. Žižek reveals how contemporary power operates through what he calls obscene supplements, unofficial practices that violate the system's official rules, but are secretly necessary for the system to function. These aren't corruptions of the system. They're how the system actually works beneath its official ideology. Officially, capitalism is about free markets and fair competition. Unofficially, it operates through monopolies, government subsidies, regulatory capture, and market manipulation, Officially, democracy is about popular sovereignty and equal representation. Unofficially, it operates through lobbying, dark money, gerrymandering, and voter suppression. The genius of this arrangement is that it allows people to maintain faith in the official ideology while participating in practices that contradict it. You can believe in free markets while working for a monopolistic corporation. You can believe in democracy while living under plutocracy. You can believe in meritocracy while benefiting from inherited privilege. These obscene supplements create cognitive protection for the system by separating official ideology from actual practice. When people encounter evidence that the system doesn't work as advertised, they can dismiss it as corruption or exception, rather than recognizing it as the normal operation of the system. This separation also prevents effective resistance, because it makes it impossible to clearly identify what you're resisting. Are you opposing the official ideology, which sounds reasonable, or the obscene practices, which are officially condemned? The confusion paralyzes action by making the target unclear. But Žižek goes deeper than just information manipulation. He identifies how the system actively produces ignorance, not just as the absence of knowledge, but as a positive force that serves ideological functions. This isn't accidental ignorance. It's manufactured ignorance designed to prevent certain kinds of thinking. Consider how economic education works in most schools. Students learn about supply and demand, market efficiency, and the invisible hand, but they don't learn about class struggle, exploitation, or the historical development of capitalism. They learn technical concepts that make the current system seem natural and inevitable, but they don't learn critical concepts that would help them understand alternatives. This isn't neutral education. It's ideological programming disguised as objective knowledge. Students come away feeling educated about economics while remaining ignorant of the most important economic questions. Who benefits from current arrangements? How did these arrangements develop historically? What alternatives have been tried? What alternatives might be possible? The same pattern appears in political education, environmental education, and virtually every other domain. Students learn facts and techniques that make them effective participants in the current system, but they don't learn critical concepts that would help them evaluate or change that system. Žižek calls this unknown knowns, things that we don't know, not because the knowledge is hidden, but because the very categories for thinking about these things have been eliminated from our mental toolkit. You can't think thoughts for which you lack concepts, and the system works hard to ensure you lack the concepts necessary for thinking critically about the system itself. One of Žižek's most important insights concerns how contemporary ideology operates by presenting itself as the absence of ideology, as simply practical, realistic, evidence-based thinking that has moved beyond old-fashioned political beliefs. Neoliberalism doesn't present itself as an ideology, but as the end of ideology, as the triumph of evidence over belief, efficiency over politics, markets over ideologies. When governments implement austerity measures, privatize public services, or deregulate industries, they don't present these as ideological choices, but as practical necessities demanded by economic reality. This anti-ideological ideology is incredibly powerful because it makes resistance seem irrational, emotional, or nostalgic. If current policies aren't ideological but simply realistic responses to objective conditions, then opposition must be based on wishful thinking rather than rational analysis. But Žižek reveals that this supposed realism is actually the most ideological position possible. It treats historically specific arrangements as natural facts, temporary policies as permanent necessities, and political choices as technical requirements. The claim to be beyond ideology is itself the ultimate ideological move. This anti-ideology ideology serves confusion by making fundamental political questions appear to be technical problems. Instead of asking, what kind of society do we want? We're asked, what policies will make the economy more efficient? Instead of debating values and priorities, we're told to defer to expertise and data. The result is that political discussions become technical discussions, moral questions become economic questions, and democratic participation becomes expert administration. You're not supposed to think about these issues as a citizen with values and preferences. You're supposed to accept whatever the experts determine is most efficient or realistic. Žižek exposes how contemporary liberal tolerance actually serves to maintain the very systems it claims to criticize. This isn't genuine tolerance, but repressive tolerance. The system's ability to absorb and neutralize its own criticism by appearing to welcome diverse viewpoints while ensuring that none of these viewpoints threaten fundamental structures. You can criticize capitalism, but only in ways that lead to better capitalism. You can oppose war, but only specific wars, not the military-industrial complex that makes war profitable. You can advocate for environmental protection, but only through market mechanisms that create new opportunities for capital accumulation. The system doesn't suppress dissent. It manages dissent by channeling it into harmless forms. Protest becomes performance. Resistance becomes consumption. Revolution becomes brand identity. You can buy Che Guevara t-shirts, attend permitted protests, and vote for progressive candidates who implement conservative policies. This managed dissent serves confusion by making people feel that they're resisting the system when they're actually participating in its reproduction. You feel politically engaged because you're constantly expressing opposition to various policies and practices. But your opposition is structured in ways that never threaten the fundamental logic of the system. The genius of this arrangement is that it makes the system appear responsive and democratic while actually insulating it from meaningful challenge. Every criticism gets absorbed, every alternative gets co-opted, every resistance gets commodified. But perhaps Žižek's most disturbing insight concerns what he calls the violence of neutrality, the way that passive observation and intellectual detachment actually serve as forms of participation in violence and injustice. When you watch news coverage of war, poverty, or environmental destruction from the comfort of your living room, you're not just observing, you're participating in a specific relationship to these events that normalizes them and makes action unnecessary. The media presents these issues as natural disasters or inevitable conflicts, rather than as the predictable results of specific systems and policies. This spectacularization of suffering serves ideological functions by transforming political problems into entertainment and moral problems into aesthetic experiences. You feel informed and concerned without feeling responsible or empowered. You experience emotional engagement without political engagement. Žižek argues that this passive consumption of others' suffering is itself a form of violence, not because it directly harms anyone, but because it structures consciousness in ways that make effective solidarity impossible. You care about suffering in abstract, general ways that don't translate into concrete, specific actions. The system needs you to care about suffering just enough to feel morally superior, but not enough to actually do anything about the causes of suffering. Your compassion becomes a form of self-satisfaction that prevents rather than promotes meaningful action. So how do you escape the manufactured confusion that keeps you intellectually paralyzed? Žižek suggests that the first step is recognizing that your confusion isn't natural or personal. It's produced by specific systems for specific purposes. The antidote to manufactured confusion isn't more information, but better questions. Instead of asking, "What should I believe?" ask, "Who benefits from my confusion?" Instead of seeking the right opinions, examine the structures that shape opinion formation. Instead of trying to find truth in the flood of contradictory information, analyze the interests served by contradiction itself. Žižek advocates for what he calls traversing the fundamental fantasy, recognizing and abandoning the unconscious beliefs that keep you invested in the system. These fantasies often take the form of if-only thinking. If only we had better leaders, if only people were more informed, if only the system worked as advertised, then everything would be fine. Traversing these fantasies means recognizing that the system is working exactly as it's designed to work. The confusion isn't a malfunction, it's the function. The contradictions aren't bugs, they're features. The failures aren't accidents, they're successes from the perspective of those who benefit from failure. Once you understand this, you can begin to think clearly not by finding the right information, but by understanding how information is used to prevent thinking. You can begin to act effectively not by finding the right positions, but by recognizing how position-taking is used to prevent action. The goal isn't to eliminate confusion, but to understand confusion as a political weapon. Once you see how the weapon works, you can begin to imagine what it might mean to think and act outside the structures designed to prevent thinking and action. Žižek leaves us with a challenge. The system needs you confused because clear thinking leads to effective action, and effective action threatens the interests that benefit from current arrangements. Your confusion serves power. Your clarity threatens it. The question isn't what you should think. It's whether you'll claim your right to think clearly in a system designed to make clear thinking impossible. Will you remain intellectually paralyzed by manufactured confusion? Or will you recognize that your capacity for clear thinking is itself a political act? The choice is yours. But first, you have to recognize that it is a choice,